All right, welcome to the first Gateway API meeting in 2024. We've got a lot on the agenda today, but as always, just a reminder, this is a Kubernetes community meeting, which means we follow the Kubernetes Code of Conduct. Largely just means be nice to each other. Just one request here, if you don't mind, whenever you're speaking or want to speak, if you can use Zoom's raise hand feature, that helps make sure that everyone gets a chance to say anything that might want to. This specific agenda here, somebody can probably post it in chat as well. But this specific agenda is something that we intend for everyone to be able to edit, add suggestions to. If you are unable to, don't hesitate to just drop something in chat, and we'll try and make sure we get to it in today's meeting as well. Yeah, with that, let's run through the agenda. And this is an agenda dominated by myself, so sorry, but feel free to add your own content as necessary. Yeah. So next week, for those of us based in the US, is MLK Day. I know not everyone in the US will get that day off, but if you do, you may not be at this meeting. But of course, not everyone in the Gateway API community is in the US or has the day off. So at least some will continue to meet. Thank you to Nick for volunteering to run the meeting next week. Always helpful to have someone based in Australia to counteract US holidays and vice versa. So yeah, if anyone's around, we will still have a meeting. It'll be, kind of a free form, open agenda meeting. Bring any topics, any questions, any whatever. Yeah, but thanks, Nick, for running that one. Then next up, I just wanted to cover, it's been, I don't know, 3 weeks since we met, a while, maybe longer. I don't know. It's been a while, and things have happened. We tried to sneak a few big changes in while everyone was gone, basically. Hopefully nothing too dramatic, but this GEP, as Nick calls it, merged, and this was a huge restructure. I think Nick commented on every GEP PR that, hey, you basically have to rebase now. So sorry, but I think that was my fault. It was my suggestion to suggest changing the structure of all the things. But either
I
way, this
think it's
was a
better for
huge
the
unit
future. So
PR.
yeah, to summarize, GEPs are now stored in individual directories. They each have a YAML metadata file as well as the markdown file. And I filled out all the existing metadata for all the existing GEPs. There's a couple of things that it'd be great if people could add as they do it. The main one being there is now a change log in that metadata. So every time you open a PR that updates a GEP, if you put something in that thing, then hopefully we'll have that information for later. The intent here is to be able to use this metadata to do stuff like do automatic sort of tracking of GEPs or like that sort of thing later. But we can't do that without the data. So I figured it was better to start, since I was basically touching all the GEPs anyway. It was better to add that. The other big change in this is that there is a new type of GEP, or a new status of GEP is probably a better way to say it. That now GEPs can be a memorandum, which is a GEP that doesn't actually make any code changes, but where we record the fact that we all agreed on something. I think the main memorandums at the moment are this GEP, the one about agreeing that service mesh was something we wanted to do. I think there's one other one. Yeah, but yeah, you can see them in the website.
Yeah, this is awesome. It was much needed. The GEP process started really lightweight, but over time we've learned and realized that we needed a few more details, and I think this is a huge step forward to have some metadata. I think this will enable us to do some cool things, build some tooling, etc., to make this a little easier to manage long term. So yeah, thanks. And I'm also really pumped to see the changelog. I think we got our first PR, or there's an active PR that has a changelog entry for a GEP, which is really exciting. So there'll be one place where you can easily see the major changes that happened to a GEP.
And it's probably also relevant to say that the other thing that I added was in that schema, there is also a spot for there to be obsoleted by, and see also, and extends, I think, were the languages that we used. So basically, there's a way to have relationships between GEPs now. and those relationships are to be recorded in that metadata file, so that then we can do some more interesting stuff about which ones are which and which ones have been obsoleted and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
That's going to be relevant very soon because I have an item to split up policy attachment gap into a memorandum that agrees that policy attachment is the thing that we're doing, and then the details of the actual things for direct and inherited will be in separate gaps so that we can graduate them separately.
Yes, I'm excited about that one too. Cool. Awesome. The other thing that was kind of another XXL PR was if you've been to our website recently, you may notice it's changed some. We finally have a logo on here. We are finally using Kubernetes colors instead of the default make docs material color, and just some other structure things. If you ever tried to use Gateway API website on your phone for some strange reason, which includes myself at various points, you might have noticed that all these tabs just kind of went away and now they don't. So yay, a variety of things like that. So yeah, it's the other thing is the blog's gone, the logo's checked in. I don't know, a bunch of just a whole host of cleanup that I'd been meaning to do. And
The
is
guides
now,
section is pretty relevant for everyone here.
yeah. The guides has been cleaned up. There's a bunch. This actually is going to switch. There's another PR open to switch the ordering, but actually while we're talking about memorandums, conformance testing, versioning, service mesh, and get process. Yeah, okay. Yeah. So this is the get. But the order of these is going to switch. This is, I should be very clear, this is not at all intended to be the final update to our docs, by any stretch. It's just an incremental step towards slightly better docs that had been needed for quite some time.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Shane, did you have a question you were going to ask? No? Okay.
Me?
Cool.
No, sorry. I was raising my hand that I use the site on my phone.
Oh, sweet. There's more than one of me. That's sweet.
Yeah, you're not alone.
Cool. All right.
I think probably the most relevant part is that for people in this call is that we've got the API design guide, the CRD management guide, and the implementers guide are now all separate guides. That's pretty relevant, I think. Yeah, in that now there are specific guides for if you're when you're working on those things. The implementers guide was somewhere else before, and the CRD management stuff was not split out, so we split out that stuff.
And then we also have a developer guide and oh yes, it's new, a documentation style guide, which who knew, but Kubernetes itself has a documentation style guide, which Tim Bannister pointed me in the direction of relatively recently. And he was also asking for us to take a stance on project naming, and so we did that too, and lots of things. And diagrams, use Mermaid if you can, and yeah, nothing groundbreaking in here, but just lots of small things that I think will be good to have. Yeah. Okay. Well, with that, let's keep on moving because we've got a lot to work through today. First up is the 1.0.1 milestone. I think we're overdue for a 1.0.1 release. We've fixed a few bugs that would be good to just get out sooner than later. Then the other thing is we have this issue open. I've tried to make a case for it. I haven't had anyone push back, at least on the issue itself. So I may move forward unless there are really significant concerns. This is a case for loosening validation. I think we've discussed that in this meeting before, and there was at least some pushback in the meeting. But if you have strong pushback, maybe drop it on this issue sometime soon, or I'll just proceed and translate this into a PR. yeah, any thoughts, concerns, whatever?
I slightly prefer the idea of keeping things specific and not using like custom TLS options and stuff like that. But yeah, I will try and put something in there to that effect.
Cool. Cool. All right. And yeah, that's it for 1.0.1. I think once we have that issue settled one way or another, we'll move forward with the 1.0.1 release. But then what I think is probably going to be most interesting to everyone on this call is what we're doing coming up. We need a roadmap. We need to talk about what we're fitting in and what we're not. This has been a very common question. It's something that we said we'd talk a lot more about after KubeCon, and it's after KubeCon and now the new year. And we're very much needing to do that. So one of the things that we have mentioned before is, hey, we've got just a boatload of things in experimental. So what if as a high level criteria, we just say, if we're going to get anything into experimental, we first need to get something out of experimental. Like let's try and like not overload experimental channel. Let's try and push things through. I think that works out fairly well. I've done some sketching in a doc link below of what that could look like and what that would make room for. It is something that not it's not going to have room for everything, but it's going to have room for some things, and hopefully that's enough to keep momentum going here. So as a rough idea, if we're aiming for a release in early April, which I think is the last thing we talked about, then that means that we really need to be code complete in March. And if we're saying that to get anything into the API, we need to first get things, into experimental, we need to get things out of experimental, then getting the stuff out of experimental probably means that needs to be done in February. So that's next month. So you kind of like walk backwards and you get a rough idea of the things we're aiming for here. And the more things we can get out of experimental, the more things we can get into experimental. It kind of builds on each other using this pattern. So yeah, with that, let's walk into a doc. This is not at all intended to be a mandate. This is intended to be a working process where we work through this together collaboratively. But I just wanted to sketch out the things that I'm aware of, the things that are on my roadmap, and the things that feel close. So with that said, I think there are a few gaps that are in experimental right now that can graduate relatively soon.
So
We've got.
given the
Go ahead,
first,
Nick.
I just wanted to talk about the first thing though. Given that we don't actually have a gap saying we should do gateway at all, should we make one?
Yeah, that crossed my mind too. Yeah.
I mean, I mean, I think we could at least make a memorandum that we should have our own tool and record the fact that we agreed on that, and
Yeah.
and then say, hey, this thing will have its own release cadence in that gap. That feels like the quickest way to just be able to be like, now we have a gap. I mean, if it's a memorandum, then it's not going to be tracked, but maybe we have a gap and we call it, I don't know. But yeah, it feels like we should just make a gap.
I agree, especially now that we have memorandum gaps. Like it didn't really fit very well in the like experimental to standard because it would always be evolving. But yeah, I think exactly what you're describing of now that we have this concept of memorandum, I think this, similar to how we have a memorandum gap that we're going to do service mesh and it's going to look something like this or solve these problems, but not actually, I think that's entirely appropriate here. Let me chat with Garv about that. And yeah, I completely agree. Cool.
I think Gaurav is on the call. Gaurav.
Oh,
Yeah, sure. Definitely I can take that on.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I got a couple of, just thinking off the top of my head there, I would like to talk to a little bit more about that. Maybe reach out to Gaurav and we can have a quick chat about ways that I think we
definitely.
Yep.
Will do. Thanks.
Sorry to derail, Rob.
Cool. Yeah, no, that's perfect. That's what this is for. This whole thing is meant to be collaborative. So yeah, anyone, don't hesitate to jump in here. All right, next up is the gaps that I think are on track to graduate soon. This is, we have a big project board. I should have linked to that in here. I was kind of cross-referencing as I built this out. But we have route port matching here. This is just the idea that in route parent refs, there's a port field, and that can be used to attach to a specific gateway listener, or alternatively, it can be used as part of the mesh parent attachment kind of thing as well. It seems rather useful, but we need somebody to push it forward. This still needs documentation. As far as I can tell, we don't have any docs for this. It has some very basic conformance tests, but I think we probably need a bit more. And last I checked, there are only 2 implementations of this listed. There probably are more. I feel like this is more than the Istio and Linkerd that we currently have listed. But yeah, that's it, right? So we need somebody to own this. I chatted with John a bit, and although John's listed as the current owner, I think we could really, he's very happy to hand this off to somebody else. If anybody at all is looking for a way to contribute, I think it would be really, really useful to push this one forward. And selfishly, if you're trying to get another GEP in, think of pushing this one forward as your way to get another space for a GEP to come in to the project. So yeah, anyone interested? Dave?
It was sort of a semantic thing, but if John's not interested in pushing it forward, then should you just, I don't know, like freeze this GEP or essentially abandon it?
Oh, to clarify, I think I did not say that correctly. John and I think others are very much interested in seeing this GEP graduate. I don't think, John, I don't know if you're on the call. You can speak more clearly.
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah, I'm super interested in it. It's something that would be a good opportunity for someone to take on that's not a ton of work. It's probably one of the simpler GEPs. And I would love for that to not be me because I have a bunch of things outside of Gateway API that I'm spending my time on, unfortunately.
Okay, got it.
I think generally though, it is a fair call that if we didn't have an owner for a GEP, which should be left as frozen for a while and then possibly stale out based on the staleness rules if no one else picks it up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. That's fair.
Yeah, but I think
So
there's enough interest. That is not the case here.
Yeah, exactly. So I think there's enough, there's enough interest here that we really just need somebody to pick this up and take it over the finish line. If you're interested in that, if you're interested in doing a portion of that, there's a few subtasks here like documenting how this works, for example. Trying to figure out who else is implementing this. We know Istio, we know Linkerd, but I'm 99% sure somebody else is too. Just trying to round that up would be very useful as well. And then, trying to see if there are gaps in our conformance tests that need to be filled here. Yeah. So I'll follow up, I guess, on an issue, but definitely keep this in mind if you have any time and you're looking to contribute to Gateway API. I think this is a good opportunity. Okay, next up is gRPC route. This one Richard continues to own. I've chatted with him some offline. I don't see him on this meeting, but he has committed to getting this into 1.1, graduating gRPC route. That means conformance tests and then confirming that implementations actually pass those tests. There's already pretty thorough documentation for using gRPC route at this point, and we already have enough implementations. The big gap is conformance tests here. Yeah. And then conformance profiles, Mattia and Shane. Shane, you are on the call. I don't think Mattia is, but these are the things I think are lacking here. I don't know if you think of anything else, Shane?
Nope. Somebody did. Yeah, Mattia won't be on these because these are like midnight or 1 in the morning for him. Somebody did mention that they were willing to take a stab at the UI kind of side of things
Oh,
before
yeah.
KubeCon EU. We'll see how that goes. I don't think it's a requirement to graduate personally,
I agree.
but these two seem fine. It's pretty much there. Many people are using it. It's a little bit of cleanup on, it's just these issues, a little bit of cleanup and the possibility of a better UI, but the better UI can be a thing that builds on top of this layer later.
Yep. Yep. Cool. And then the last one I had lined up for 1.1 as a target was direct policy attachment. And this is one that Nick is basically owning, I think, from start to finish here. And it's part of the bigger GEP 713 that we've said, hey, we should split this out and try and push direct policy attachment forward first. This, I feel like we get half a point for it because we're not moving a full, we're splitting and then moving something forward, but whatever, however you want to score that, that's what we're doing. And I think that fits into 1.1. I don't know, Nick, do you have anything else?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that there's much to say there. I think that we already have some stuff there. Probably the existing notes that we have about status, I think, are enough. I probably want some folks who've had concerns about status before to have a review. Cough, 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 Lynn. I need to actually do the split out first and sort of so that we can agree if that unit that I split it out into is sort of graduatable as it stands. Again, the intent of the GEP and adding the memorandum thing was that the sort of the preamble of and sort of some of the background of GEP 713 will stay as GEP 713, and that will be a memorandum. But there'll sort of be a pointer there to say where we have the stuff about direct and inherited policy attachment today, it'll be this is defined in another GEP. See there.
Yep. Makes sense. Cool. Okay, so I think those are the extent of GEPs that can fit into 1.1 in terms of going from experimental to standard. If anyone at all can think of any others that I may have missed, don't hesitate to reach out, put something in chat, whatever. There are another 4 GEPs, I think, that are right on the, right in line for our 1.2 target. Those include TLS from gateway to backend. Thanks, Candace. Although we're targeting 1.2 with these, I think that there's some significant work. I think of specifically doing conformance tests for this one is going to be particularly challenging. So just because we're saying, well, it doesn't really fit into 1.1 because we haven't had enough soak time, that doesn't mean we shouldn't be doing anything here. We should definitely be doing conformance tests, trying to make sure that this is ready in time for 1.2 and not leaving everything for the very last minute. Similarly, timeouts. Believe we have conformance tests already that are fairly good, but we just need to make sure that we actually have some implementations that are passing those tests. I don't think we have that signal yet. Candace, go ahead.
I just wanted to ask, what's the if April is for 1.1, what's the timeline you're thinking for 1.2?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think we've roughly said that, last year we did 3 releases, and I think we liked the cadence of 3 releases. I don't really know what that means exactly. I would say summer is probably 1.2.
July to August is 3 to 4 months after the 1.1 then. So I would guess that it'd be something in that ballpark.
Yeah. Does that seem fair?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Great.
Thank you.
Yep. Then timeouts, Flynn has volunteered to own this, so I think we're okay there. Then Lior has been owning the supporter features in gateway class. This really doesn't need much. You can't really have conformance tests of a conformance test feature, kind of getting into inception there. It does need documentation, but I think this will be fairly straightforward to graduate once soak time has passed. And then finally, Dave's GEP, which is backend protocol selection, which I think is primarily documentation and conformance tests. Is there much else that I'm missing, Dave?
We have HCC tests and WebSocket tests, I think.
Okay.
So maybe just documentation, maybe in the implementer's guide.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds about right. And then, just because we said we need at least 6 months of soak time, that rules out this upcoming release, but it, I think, very much puts us on track for 1.2. Cool. Okay, so that's the space that we have. That gives us, let's say, 3.5 maybe spaces, if everything goes well, that we could fit new GEPs into for 1.1. Any comments, questions, concerns about this kind of approach?
Are these GEPs frozen until they graduate?
I'd say, I hate to say frozen. I hope they can continue to evolve. But one of the things that the graduation criteria say is that you can't make major changes to a GEP in the same release as you're graduating it, kind of thing.
Okay.
That's, yeah. Shane?
I think even Dave's comment earlier kind of, I think there was some sensitivity to, and I share sensitivity to the potential pipelining issue that comes up from this approach, which, I mean, we all must kind of understand that, there's some sensitivity there. I would just say, I'm okay with giving this a shot, but people do need to be, if you really feel like you're starting to feel really stuck, or like you're starting to really lament the fact that we're trying to pipeline like this, be very vocal. We don't want people to start being angry, but quietly angry that things are working this way. We're very flexible to trying new approaches and stuff like that.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. The motivation here is to avoid what we've seen in other examples, such as Kubernetes upstream, where it's very easy for things to get stuck in alpha or beta and never make it on. And so upstream, they made some pretty painful choices to basically force things to move on or leave the API. And this, we're trying to basically have a fixed number of slots for experimental things we can, keep a handle on, and do what we can to push things out of experimental as quickly as possible to make room for others. But I know there's a lot more features than we have room for or capacity for, so it is hard to find the right balance here. Candace?
I just had a question about direct policy attachment. It says all that's needed for graduation is some, is to split them out into separate GEPs. Does that mean that these GEPs will be memo GEPs, or?
So I'm not 100% sure yet. I think probably direct policy attachment, because we're not actually because it's a bit of a gray area, because we do have API constructs that we kind of want people to use as part of that, so that we can be graduating those API constructs to standard. But we don't, and we will be hopefully graduating backend TLS policy to standard at some point, and that's a sort of an example implementation. I'm not 100% sure. I'm gonna have a look at it as I do the work to split it out. But it'll either be like the direct policy attachment will either be a memorandum because there's not enough API stuff in there, or it could however conceivably be like a standard style GEP as well that then graduates further through. But if it is one, it'll probably just go straight to standard and sort of bypass some of the usual process, because we've already done what we're talking about.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, it's poorly defined at the moment because we haven't had this problem before.
Yeah.
Part of the reason for doing the GEP is to make it so that we don't have this problem ever again. And that's one of the other reasons we want to do, we want to sort of be pipelining these things a little bit, is to make sure that we don't have GEPs that fall off the bottom of the heap and that everyone forgets about for a while, which is what happened to policy attachment. Like, people were using it, but we didn't sort of keep moving it forward for like years, and so we really don't want that to happen again in the future.
Thanks. And related, but not really related, I'm just trying to figure out exactly what is meant by pipelining this. So if the incoming gaps they have a column called interest level and complexity, but we don't have that kind of column for the experimental gaps. I mean, do we have the experimental gaps already gotten to the point where we don't question the interest level or complexity at this point?
Yeah, that's a really good question. This is definitely a rough doc, and I think complexity in particular, like if I had the entire policy attachment gap on there, I probably should have had a complexity column, because policy attachment in particular has proven to be endlessly complicated. You could say the same about some of other gaps that aren't here.
Whatever the Gateway
would say-
API equivalent of MP complete is, I think.
Yeah. I would say that the gaps I listed here are ones that have a fairly smooth path between us and graduation, in my opinion. So I didn't feel like they needed to be further differentiated. It was something like where I felt like we were all equally interested in just getting them across the finish line here and making room for other gaps in experimental channel. But there are other gaps that are in experimental channel that I haven't listed here, and that's because they are more complicated, and that is absolutely worth additional discussion, policy attachment in particular, of how we can manage that. And like, one of those is we're splitting it out. We're taking direct policy attachment and pushing that through as a smaller, easier to solve problem. The other route types is also a very challenging problem that is not listed here right now. That is definitely worth time, but as you can see, we already have a pretty a lot of work and not a lot of people volunteering to do it. So that's we have to pick and choose our efforts.
Yeah, I think practically what a lot of this comes down to is that for every single thing that we have listed here, like the three of us sort of as the maintainers need to keep an eye on it. And we are attempting to, in a polite and organizationally defined way, to sort of say, hey, like we can't just keep arbitrarily adding more stuff for us that we need to keep track of. And so we want to kind of sort of just, the reason to have a pipeline is to sort of say to people, hey, like there's only so much space at the input of the pipeline. If your stuff is not in there yet, then we got to move some stuff along to be able to do that, so that we can hopefully get everyone invested in keeping the velocity of the pipe, up.
Yeah, totally agree.
Cool.
Just sort of
Awesome.
curious about. Yeah, we don't talk about, I guess, I don't mean to keep going on about this, but we don't talk about interest level that much. I closed that pull request that I opened that was trying to gauge interest level about different gaps, because nobody was interested in marking down their interest level, basically. So yeah, I am kind of curious as how do we estimate interest level? How do we estimate complexity, I guess? So
Yeah,
we'll talk
I
about
was
that
really
more in
struggling
the
with
future.
that. That's actually a really good transition, or a segue into this one. When I tried to fill out interest level, these are very subjective and from my own opinion, but this is me basically combining the basically reactions on the GEP issue. If there's a lot of people that have thumbs up an issue, that's a signal that, hey, there's a lot of people interested in this. For example, rate limiting has 19, I think, thumbs up, which is the highest I've seen on a Gateway API issue. So that's a signal. Then there are just the KubeCon and other interactions I have where you have people come to you and say, I'd really love to use Gateway API, it just doesn't have feature X, right? And I think Nick, myself, and Shane all shared the same takeaway from KubeCon in Chicago, that session persistence and retries were the two that we just kept on getting over and over of, if only you had this, then I'd move to Gateway. And so that's why I put those in the high category of, and they were also, had reactions and interaction on GitHub as well. But this is a very non-scientific approach. And I would love to get a better approach here. Maybe we standardize on the thumbs up an issue if this is something that interests you, that is probably the best possible thing. I also thought about gauging interest level in terms of the number of implementations that would implement a feature if it was released tomorrow, kind of thing. So an implementation has a vote here as well. But those are really two different levels of interest, I think, and both are worth trying to capture somehow. If anyone has ideas, I'm very, very open. This is just a rough shot in the dark to give an approximate level. Yeah. So yeah, with that, maybe or go ahead.
Oh, sorry. What you just described almost sounds like the House and the Senate, basically. So if you're an implementer, you get 2 votes. If you're an otherwise popular vote, kind of, not votes, sorry, but representatives. I'm sure we could do something like that. Implementers get.
That's actually we could have some fun with that. Yeah, any proposals are welcome here. I'd love to get something like a little more formal than just these kind of 3 relatively arbitrary categories that are, very rough. So yeah.
I'll put something in Slack and then I'll stop
Cool.
talking about this.
No, great feedback. So I put these very roughly in order of the things that I've been thinking about, but obviously everyone else is going to have a different order. So this is not meant to be a final ordering of priorities.
You've got author's privilege of being the one who actually wrote this stuff down, Rob. So
yeah. Right. So based on the KubeCon interactions and also the work that's gone into session persistence, I haven't seen Grant if he's on this call, but there have been a number of people that have put a tremendous amount of effort into getting session persistence across the line. So as I'm trying to think about how we prioritize incoming GEPs, I think it's some combination of interest level, complexity, and how much, how close it is to being ready, right? And I think session persistence is one of the closest to being ready on this entire list. And it also happens to have a high interest level and a relatively moderate complexity. Not going to say obviously a lot of people have spent a lot of time thinking about it, so I definitely can't call it a low complexity thing. But I think the complexity remaining is relatively moderate. Then next up, retries is one that there have been a lot of people that have expressed a lot of interest in this one, but we don't actually have a GEP written. So this is an interesting one in that there's no one who's really owning this. There's clearly high interest. There's what I think is moderate complexity, and I think high portability here, but I've been wrong before on this. So this is one that I think is very, very important. I'd love to see this move forward and get into scope, but there is nobody who is owning this today that I know of. So volunteers, very, very welcome. Then next up we have Gateway Client Cert Verification. Arco has owned this, has volunteered this on his own. And Shane, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, if we haven't done it, is there an issue for that retries one?
Yeah, there is. I
Okay.
I have created the issue. Frank, I guess, signed up for this one.
I was about to say,
Maybe we
I thought
should.
there was somebody who wanted to do this. I was getting confused. I was like, wait.
Oh,
Okay.
I think there are many people that have said they want to do this, but yeah, I don't
Okay, we can come
know.
back around to that. I just like you said, nobody has it, and I'm like, wait a minute.
No, you're right. I should revisit that because apparently Frank is assigned, but I don't think he's been working on it.
It's been a while, yeah.
Yeah, good call. And then Gateway Client Cert, that's Arco. I don't know if he's on this call. Yeah, you are. But I think you've got a really
Arco
detailed
actually
feature-
also did add this to the agenda for later. So Arco, do you want to
Okay, sweet.
to talk
Okay.
talk a little bit about it now while we're talking about it anyway?
Yeah, PR is out, address changes. Please take a look.
Oh, sweet. Okay. Yeah, and I think this is, from what I could tell, it seems like a fairly straightforward thing to configure. What you're proposing is really just validate this cert, the incoming cert with a CA, right? You're just allowing a CA to be configured. I don't think you're even doing subject name at this point or anything else. Like it's just,
Yeah, top level client verification home with a specific CA cert field. So you can expand and add more fields in the future, but I
Yeah.
think my proposal is just the CA cert field. Yeah.
yeah. So in that case, I feel like complexity of low feels appropriate here. It feels pretty straightforward and very portable. There's only so many ways you can do TLS client cert verification, and so in that sense, I think this is pretty compelling, but I have not seen the same level of interest that I have in the other gaps. But I think this is
I think
pretty
that's partly
compelling.
because it feels like almost a table stakes kind of thing that we
Yeah.
should have done. So
Yeah.
I mean, I'm in agreement. We should try and get this one in. It's pretty close. Arco reviewing the PR is on my list. But yeah, again, the idea here is one of the reasons to put this sort of, hey, knock something out of the thing is so that we don't end up with things stuck in provisional, and they're all moving, even worse, moving into experimental or implementable, and then no one implementing them because like no one has time because they're busy with all the other things.
Yeah.
Especially now, given that we kind of have we have written into the GET process that if no changes happen within 6 months, then then we really should be declining the GEP. So we should be at least asking, should we decline this GEP? Or obsolete or whatever the status was that we agreed on.
Yeah, well said. The next one is rate limiting. Rate limiting is one that also in a way feels like it should be table stakes, and lots of people have shown interest in this one. I thought, oh man, this should be easy. This should be really portable. It should be very, very simple. I spent a little bit of time looking at it, and I thought, oh, actually this is less portable than I thought it would be. Like how complicated could rate limiting be? And it turns out fairly complicated. So
famous last words.
Yeah. So here's what I'd say. Here's how I labeled this one. This is high demand for sure, but also, at least on first glance, higher complexity than I imagined. And I cannot make a strong statement about portability here, other than potentially problematic. I don't want to say anything more than that, but this could very much benefit from somebody doing some initial exploratory work, just kind of that first stage of a GEP of, here's what other implementations do, here's the
Needs a review
overlap.
like we did with timeouts.
Yeah. So
Yes.
we really need, if you want to see rate limiting come into the main API, we really need that initial exploratory work. I can leave a comment here, but given the complexity, I think it's highly unlikely that we would have time to fit it into 1.1, but it definitely could use some exploratory work in the next month or two. So it's something that we could fit into a future release like 1.2. And that's a really good point too. If if it could be integrated with auth, and you could rate limit based on users. Yeah. So definitely appreciate some exploratory work there. If anyone wants to volunteer, maybe comment on the issue if you want to volunteer. If not, I'll add a comment just explaining what we discussed here. Then finally, named route rules. Named route rules have gotten a lot of attention, understandably so. And this is something that would allow for a number of things, but I think most people are really wanting this for policy attachment, to be able to attach a policy to a specific section in a route. I would classify the interest level as somewhere between moderate and high. I don't know. That one was really a shot in the dark. But this is one of those things where the API change is incredibly simple. It's a one-line, API change. It's very, very simple. But the downstream impacts of having two ways to do the same thing, like, a route, custom route filter versus policy attachment targeting a route rule, is really complex and hard to reason about. So
this one is also, as Candice just pointed out, this one's also on the agenda for today.
Yeah.
So it probably is worth just talking a little bit about the fact that the PR that adds the support is like ready to merge, and that's okay.
Yeah.
But that sort of moves this by default, moves this to effectively implementable, because no, this one is actually only defines what we want to do, so it doesn't. But we do need to sort of I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but we do need to ensure that there's some discussion in there about how we allow for the different behaviors that this unlocks, and what we recommend, because probably we're going to need updates to various guides to sort of say, hey, you can do this either this way or this way. We recommend doing it this way because of reasons ABC. So yeah, that's probably going to need me to have a look at it. So Gear's the one doing this, I think, and you're probably going to be blocked on me for a little while on this one until I got to do the splitting out the direct policy attachment work, because that way we have a different answer for direct versus inherited policy attachment. Because I think one of the things that Rob and I are both worried about here is once you can allow attaching things to, like policy, for example, to only some things, then that theoretically means you can attach it to like a single listener on a gateway. What happens if you've got an inherited policy that attaches to a single listener on a gateway that controls settings that are only apply on some route rules inside some routes? It gets very complicated very quickly, and we already have problems with sort of people being able to tell what applies to what. And so we need to sort of have some guidelines around what to do there and what not to do, so that we don't end up shooting users in the foot.
Yeah.
To mangle a metaphor. That we don't end up making things way harder than they need to be for users, because you can't tell what's happening. Oh, sorry, you made it. Man, it's late for you. Thank you for coming.
I'm here. No worries at all. Just feel like, even though I agree with it 100% with everything that you guys said, and indeed, I think most of the interest around that particular change has to do with policy attachment. I also would like to highlight the other things that other benefits for adding that particular field to those route rules, right? Such as for status reporting and for logging, this kind of stuff. So I think there are interests beyond policy attachment related to that change. So something to also to keep in mind. And so I don't know if this is enough to try to decouple those two conversations, right? So is there any gain for us to move forward with adding the name field to those route rules, and on a separate discussion, what it represents for policy attachment? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's really hard to separate the two, because at least the use cases, I mean, once something is possible, people will do it. That much is very clear through the history of this API and others. Whether or not you intended for it to be done, it will be done. And that is the unfortunate thing. So I think we do need to have a clear answer for how this interacts, why we're allowing it. Or we could say we simply don't recommend this to be used with policy attachment at all, but that may just either people will do it anyways or it will dry up interest in this gap, I think. Like the other examples of like debugging or other, like it is theoretically useful, but I don't think I think most of the interest in this is policy attachment, but maybe you have other interests in mind as well that I've missed.
Yeah, I think my point here is that we don't necessarily need to include in this particular gap, any change related to the target rep, for example, right? So nowadays we have target reps that can target an entire resource, or in this particular case of a gateway, a section of the gateway, right, in the form of using the section name. We don't need to, in my opinion, to make this one change. To include that part of the name in this first iteration. In a way, people working on policies, and I can speak from my own experience, we can already target a section of a resource, right? It just happens that we cannot refer to that section by name, right? But we can find ways, to target just a portion of a resource, right? And this is not me disagreeing with you, because I completely agree with you that once it's there, people will also use it for policy attachment, right?
So yeah, look, I think this one is, as you say, like the API change is straightforward. The work is just to make sure that we have clearly written guidelines in this gap, but also added to the policy attachment gaps. And that's the only reason why I say like it might be blocked, is because I've got to substantially rewrite the policy attachment gaps anyway. And so that's sort of the only reason why I use the word blocked, is that it needs me to finish the splitting apart GEP 713 work, so that then we can put references to this gap in those gaps. This is where that ability to sort of make relationships between gaps is going to come in real handy. And sort of explicitly specify relationships, because it's going to be very important. So I don't see the sort of blocked state being that long. I understand like you put a lot of great work in on here, and I don't want this to be blocked, but I do want to make sure that we're not creating ourselves another big policy attachment related problem, which could very easily happen. So can you give me like a few weeks, maybe to sort of the end of January, start of February, to sort of get the GEP 713 stuff done, and then hopefully I'm actually going to be in the Europe time zone sort of early Feb anyway. So maybe we can do a call or something like that once hopefully I've got the GEP 713 split done, and then we can just have a chat about, given that's done, like where we think we can do this. Like I want this to move ahead, but like I just want to make sure we do it right. That's all.
Okay, thanks, no problem.
Thanks.
Cool.
Yeah, I'm
No,
sorry to be the fucking guy. I hate it when I have to do that.
No, I think that's reasonable. Thank you, Nick, for following up. Well, saying a follow up on this, and I think we have said section name specifically in policy attachment is limited to direct policy attachment anyways. That's the part you're going to be focusing on with this GEP work. So I think this all does line up. And like we've already said, we need to make room for new experimental features. So maybe this is the thing that is explicitly tied to that other feature. Like if we can get this in, then we can get the other thing, then that's a prereq for the other. Yeah. Cool. Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. I know I took a ridiculous amount of time on that. I expect we'll come back to discuss that in more detail in the not too distant future. Did we cover enough about your agenda item here? Anything else you wanted to say?
No, absolutely.
Okay.
In the end, this was only about raising attention to the PR and taking some more reviews. Thank you. Yeah.
Cool. And I think Arco, this may be the same thing for you. I think we may have already covered your GEP okay?
Yeah. Yeah, I
cool.
think Shane, Nick, Rob, if you can just add some comments to see
Cool.
what's remaining in that one, that'd be great. Yeah.
Great. And I'm realizing thanks to Arco for the comment in chat, I forgot to get down to the bottom two. So one, auth, there's been a million feature requests related to auth. I linked to one of them. These are all what I would, consider high complexity, but what we really need, if anyone wants to push these forward, is just kind of that state of the world approach here. Just a survey of what's possible across different data plane implementations, to see where there might be overlap, and then go from there, to take the path forward from very high complexity to maybe just moderate or high. And then cores, cross origin requests, that is no gap, no issue. Seems like almost no interest level here, but it does seem like kind of a table stakes feature. So it's on my roadmap as something that it seems like it would be. Oh, there is an issue. Thank you.
There is an issue. Yep.
I missed it. 1767. Okay, so I'll link to that. This feels like something like that. Again, table stakes, feels like the API should include it. We don't right now. Yeah. So just maybe very briefly, we're basically at time here. So let me just say that my takeaway from this is the ones I listed as, 1, 2, 3 here feel like pretty compelling argument for 1.1. This named route rules in particular feels like one that, as long as we can get direct policy attachment through, it could be a good fit as well for 1.1. But all of this is dependent on getting these gaps through the standard in this release. So a lot of work, and we could use help. So if there are places, we have lots of opportunities to help out here. If you've got anything you'd like to help get through, please don't hesitate to reach out, and we can use all hands on deck for this one. Then don't have time to discuss this one, but if you haven't already seen this PR from Sanjay, this is about how implementation should treat ordering for route filters. And the current proposal is simply to say that if you can care about the ordering and implement them in the order they're specified, you should. But that's it. There's more to it than that. There's a good comment thread, but just want to bring everyone's attention to this. It will probably merge in sometime this week, unless there's significant pushback. But just wanted to make sure it didn't get missed. And with that, I think I'm gonna leave mine for this is a whole can of worms that I'll save for another day. So with that, thank you everyone. Have a good rest of your week, and we'll see you online. Great one.